welcome back. It's Tuesday, November 8th. The sun is shining. I feel grateful, but first things first, most importantly, round of applause for you guys. Man. I wanted to start this show by shouting you guys out, the fans. The support has been amazing so far. It's been more than I could have asked for at this point. I mean, I think I've had 3 or 4 podcasts already eclipse 100 views. So shout out to you guys. You guys have been spectacular. But as you know, and as you can see on the screen here, today's show will be primarily led by you guys. Last Thursday, I asked you guys to reach out to me with any questions or hot takes you had, and we were going to bring them to the show today. And boy, do we have some interesting things to cover on today's show. Without further ado, welcome to the Anomaly Podcast. I'm your host, Owen Stiftar. Let's dive into some news first, this Colts drama, but then, of course, your hot takes. All right, first things first, I wanted to do my due diligence in covering the recent Colts drama. I can't talk right now. Stick with me. You guys will have plenty of graphics on the screen to walk you through everything that I'm seeing and I'm saying, so that'll also help. But regardless, yesterday morning, Frank Reich, former coach for the Indianapolis Colts, was relieved of his duties. He started off this season at 3-5-1. He was 40-33-1 throughout his tenure as the coach of the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts also made one of the most surprising moves of the season. Not even 20 minutes later, they brought in Jeff Saturday as the interim head coach. I'm not too sure if Jeff Saturday has any previous coaching experience, but one thing I do know about him is that he has a great football mind. Obviously, he was the center for Peyton Manning on all those great early 2000 Indianapolis Colts teams. But it's safe to say the Colts have been one of the most surprising disasters of this season. And though they still might have a shot to win the division, with it being weak this year, I believe it would be smart to unintentionally tank, I have air quotes there, but unintentionally tank and get another franchise QB in that city. They desperately need it. They desperately want it. And can you imagine a team that is a quarterback away with a Bryce Young or with a C.J. Stroud or Will Levis? The future is bright with Indy, but they have to make the right moves, and they've struggled to get the right guy in there at the most important position, and that is the quarterback. But that's going to do it. That's all I really wanted to cover for today. Let's get into your guys' takes. I mean, this was fun for me to put together, and it's going to be fun, I believe, for you guys to see and then follow along with me. Leave your guys' opinions on these hot takes down below, and we'll see if we agree. But without further ado, but now, I wanted to restate the purpose of this episode. Like I said in the intro, last Thursday I asked for your questions and hot takes. These takes aren't mine. I want to preface that. They aren't mine. We're going to start with some NFL hot takes that you guys sent in. Then we're going to move to the NBA hot takes that we have. And then we're going to finish off with some very interesting fantasy football questions. So without further ado, the first hot take comes in from a longtime friend. I've known him since second grade, man. So we're going over 10 years. A long-time listener of the show, Amir Stewart. He's been doing his thing at corner over there at Siena Heights in Michigan. But as you see, his first take is that the Seahawks will regret winning this much this season, and fans will be begging Pete Carroll to sit Geno Smith by the end of the year. To say a team or a person is winning too much seems crazy, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that is the goal in life. It's to win, whether it's in your faith, relationships, energy, economics. You want to win, and you want to constantly improve. I mean, that's the goal in life, to get 1% better each and every day. But strictly for this statement, I do agree with the first half of it. I do believe the Seahawks front office, they're prisoners of the moment. And again, you don't want to tell your professional athletes that you're paying millions of dollars to go out there and purposely lose games. But when we take a step back and we look at this roster, let's be real. They don't have enough to compete at the high level when it matters most in a playoff setting. So in April, I believe when we look back at this season for the Seahawks, unless they prove me wrong and the rest of the world and they go and win a Super Bowl, when we look back, I believe this team is going to regret not getting a top pick, which, could result in their next franchise guy. A top pick, like I've mentioned a couple times on this podcast, the C.J. Strouds of this draft, the Bryce Youngs of this draft. There's potential franchise guys in this draft. And like I said, unless they win a Super Bowl, they might regret winning as much as they have so far this season. I don't agree, however, with the fans begging Pete Carroll to sit Geno Smith. Mainly it's mainly because of how dreadful Drew Lock has looked. I'm not even sure who their third string quarterback is, but right now I believe there's just a lot of delusion circulating around the Seahawk front office and the Seahawk fans, right? There's a lot of delusion with them right now. I mean, they believe they could be a sneaky contender. They believe Geno is good enough. I mean, their argument is that Geno, he's good enough. He just hasn't gotten the recognition. There we go. I said it. But he doesn't get the recognition he deserves just because he was a backup for so long after those years he was a starter for the Jets. But so I don't know. For this first hot take, I agree with the first half. I agree that they're going to regret winning this much and not being in a position to grab a franchise guy, at least not easily, right? They might have to throw the farm to get a top pick. And in that case, then it worked out either way. But that's extremely hard, and you're giving up a lot when you could have just tanked and had the pick regardless. I don't agree with the second half of the statement that they're going to be begging Geno to be benched. Everybody in Seattle loves Geno right now, and a lot of people in the NFL do as well. Everyone's just trying to find a spot in their heart to give him the proper recognition. But the next hot take, I can't say that for some reason, but the next hot take comes in from Zaire. Hopefully everything's good, man, over there at Toledo. Hopefully college is moving swiftly so far. But nonetheless, man, Zaire comes in with his Seattle hot take. We're starting off with a very Seattle-based hot takes in episode so far, but I promise you it's not like that. This is the last one. But his hot take is Tyreek Woolen has the chance to be better than Richard Sherman. That's a hot take, man. Zaire, for those that don't know, is a Seahawk lifer. He is the only Seahawk fan that I know, but nonetheless, he loves the Seahawks, and this take doesn't surprise me coming from him. But who knows? He may be onto something. Tyreek Woolen, he was Seattle's fifth-round pick from this previous draft, and he's first in the league right now in interceptions. Pro Football Focus ranks him as the 29th best cornerback in the league based off all the advanced numbers that we're not going to get into. But what's amazing is that I was doing some research into Woolen, and this is only his third total year in his life that he's played the cornerback position. He finished off his college career at UTSA, playing the position in the latter half. He was obviously a redshirt, but nonetheless, he played his last 2 years in college at cornerback, and in only his third year at cornerback, he's a top 30 corner in the NFL. So that's impressive nonetheless. But the comparison of this rookie corner and one of the best Seahawk players ever, maybe the best Seahawk defensive player ever. Obviously, there's a lot of people you can argue there. I'd probably give it to Bobby Wagner. Nonetheless, the comparison of these two guys starts with their measurables, right? Woolen is 6'4", 205. Sherman, in his best, for the majority of his career, hovered around 6'3", 195, 200. So they're pretty much the same size and height, right? But the difference is Sherman at his pro day and in his prime ran about a 4.5 40. Woolen is running a 4.25. So he's a little bit bigger and he's a little bit faster. So right there, that's already in Woolen's advantage when we talk about these guys. But let's actually dive into their actual play. But for both of these corners, they're both great in zone coverage. Even in his early careers, Woolen has He's one of the top 10 zone corners in the league, so that's very impressive to say the least. But we all know Richard Sherman, as of right now, he has a clear edge in the man-to-man department. In Sherman's early career, he was always a great man-to-man corner. Woolen needs to work on it. We always knew Sherman to be one of the smartest, more physical corners in the NFL with great ball skills. Woolen, he needs to work on that, like I said. It's hard to compare a rookie to a Hall of Famer, right? Because for Sherman, there's a reason his name is brought up when we talk about the greatest at the position. Sure, I've never met anybody that says Sherman is better than Darrelle Revis or Deion Sanders, but Sherman, there's a reason why his name is always brought up in that conversation, right? So nonetheless, Richard Sherman, it's hard to compare these guys, but let's get back into Woolen's side of the argument, right? His intangibles are there. Like I said, he has pretty much the same height and weight that Richard Sherman did for the majority of his playing career. And he's already shown that, he's had great. Woolen's, like I said, he's one of the best zone corners in the league, and he's shown promise in improving his man coverage. But one of the biggest things about him right now, he's not very physical. He's not always taking the number one matchup. He's kind of just staying on one side of the field. Teams are taking advantage of that, obviously putting their best route runners on Woolen instead of just instead of the same guy every single play. It's too early, obviously, for this conversation right now, with Woolen only being in his third year at the position and in his first year in the league. But for the sake of Zaire, the Seahawks, and the rest of us NFL fans, I do hope that he becomes better than Richard Sherman. As much as I want the rest of the league to suck, as a Browns fan, I want it to be easy for us. But I'm a football fan first, and I'll never deny or regret seeing evolution in the game that we all love. So, for football's sake, I hope that Zaire's right. I hope that Tyreek Woolen will be better than Richard Sherman. That's going to be a pleasure for all of us NFL fans to watch for many years to come. Next up, we're going to have a hot take from Tyler. I haven't seen him in a little bit, but glad that he's reaching out. We still talk to this day, so he's coming in. He is also a Ravens fan that will explain this take. We're seeing a lot of bias here early on, but I can't say that I would do anything different. He's coming in saying that Lamar Jackson is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. We won't spend too much time on this one, as I believe it's fairly simple. The answer to your question is yes. The reason I included this one is because most people don't believe that Lamar is a top 5 quarterback. Most believe that passing stats are the only thing that determines what is and what isn't an elite quarterback in the NFL. And arguably the most important thing that isn't recorded in sports or even work is, along with leadership, is impact. Impact is one of the most important things out there that isn't measured. You can't put a measurement or a stat on impact, right? But you can argue, for Lamar's sake and for the Ravens in his time there, that no one has had a bigger impact in football than Lamar Jackson with the Ravens. And, coming into the season and just like, for his whole career, the biggest stigma around Lamar Jackson is that he couldn't pass the ball. He wasn't accurate enough. Well, he's improved that dramatically this year. It is with no question. He's also the best running quarterback of all time, and he's far from finished. He still has 10 years left in his career, minimum. So he's far from finished from already being the best running quarterback of all time. So if his biggest flaw was his accuracy, and that's improved, we all know that his legs are still as much of a factor as they were early in his career, especially when he won the MVP. Is there any doubt now? Is there any doubt that he is not a top 5 quarterback? For those that are wondering, my top 10 quarterbacks are as follows. They're in no particular order. I like to do tiers instead of order, if that makes any sense. My top 5 right now, again, not in order. I have Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson. from 5 to 10, I have Rodgers, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Tom Brady. And this might surprise you. I couldn't get myself not to do this. But Tua, I put Tua in there. I wanted to pay my respects to Tua. But yeah, I mean, my top 5, first off, I thought it was very interesting. My top 5 quarterbacks are all AFC quarterbacks. So if that doesn't tell you how tough it is to get out the AFC, that tells you all you need to know. Yet again, I have Mahomes, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson. I believe Lamar is in that tier of quarterback, and I believe it is with no doubt he is top 5. Next up, Amir comes in again. He has 2, I believe. There's a couple people in here that have 2, and I mean, it's more the merrier, right? He comes in and he says the Vikings are Super Bowl contenders. There's 2 sides to this coin. You might be like, Owen, this question or this hot take is crazy. I mean, the Vikings are, they're 7-1. They're obviously contenders. But on the flip side of that coin, we can look at their quarterback position, the most important position on a football team. And we could say, Kirk's never won a big game, whether it's prime time or especially in the playoffs. He's never won a big game. I hear you, both sides of it. But let me explain to you why this Vikings team, in my eyes, is different this year. Yes, they're 7-1, but put the record aside for a second, right? When we look at this team, they have arguably the best receiver in the NFL in Justin Jefferson. They just picked up a Pro Bowl tight end in TJ Hawkinson, who looked great in his debut, by the way. I played against him in fantasy, go figure. But not to mention they have a consistent top 10 running back in Dalvin Cook. Their O-line has improved this year. It's actually getting underrated at this point. I mean, we all know Adam Thielen's there, and he's been there since the creation of the Minnesota Vikings, back when they had Fran Tarkenton and all them boys. But then on the defensive side of the ball, they have the NFL sack leader in Zadarius Smith, who, in my opinion, isn't even their best defensive lineman. It might sound crazy, but I believe their best defensive lineman is Daniel Hunter. I mean, he's a freak athlete. We already know he's kind of like a Walmart version of Myles Garrett, right? But nonetheless, he's a freak athlete, and I believe he's a top 10 D lineman in the NFL. On the back side of their defense, you have experienced vets like Eric Kendricks, like Pat Peterson, like Harrison Smith, who have helped this team to become a top 10 defense. So not only do you have a top 10 offense, not only do you have a top 10 defense, you're 7-1, you're looking great, you have control of the division, and for me, I believe we're going to find a lot about this team next Sunday when they play the Bills in Buffalo. And, the Buffalo's coming off of a loss. Obviously, we'll cover this more on Thursday. Little plug there, but don't miss that. We're going to make our prediction on the game. But we're going to find a lot about this Minnesota Vikings team on next Sunday, when they're playing a peed-off Buffalo Bills team that is coming off of a game they shouldn't have lost. And we're really going to find out a lot about how dangerous this team could be. One thing I will say about the Vikings being real contenders, I do love that this year it doesn't feel like, watching them, it doesn't feel like Justin Jefferson has to do quite literally everything for this offense to be relevant. And this year it seems a lot more spread out. And Justin Jefferson, though it's spread out, he's still getting his. And he's still arguably making his case for the best receiver in football. I will agree with this. I will agree with the Vikings are real contenders. It all depends on Kirk. And, I believe my opinion of if they're contenders or not could change after this week against the Bills. We're going to move over. We have a question now, and then we'll get back into the hot takes. We have a question coming in from Mackenzie, but her question is, do the Browns have a chance to bounce back after their bye week and play like they did the back half of 2020? If what you're looking for is a playoff win, I believe there's a small possibility. The Browns sit at 3-5 currently, with their toughest stretch in their schedule coming up, with Miami, Buffalo, and Tampa Bay in their next 3 games. After that, obviously, we get our hopeful franchise quarterback back in Deshaun Watson. I believe that if we can win 1 or maybe even 2 of these next 3 games, we have a strong shot at the playoffs. But if we go up and we strike out in these next 3 games, we then sit at 3-8. It'd be time to shift our focus to the next season where we wouldn't have to deal with an 11-game suspension from our quarterback. We'd be good to go from the start, or at least we would hope, right? But I do think that 2 wins in this next 3-game stretch completely changes our perspective as fans on this Browns team for the remainder of the season. If we sit at 5-6, just about 500, with Deshaun Watson coming back off of his suspension, you would have to think that if we went 2 of the next 3, the morale is going to be high. Everyone's going to be pumped for the remainder of the season, the return of Deshaun Watson. And like I said, if we do sit at 5-6 when Watson returns, I see there's no chance that he loses to his former team in the Texans. That would lead us to a 6-6 record, right? Saying that we went 2 of the next 3, and then Watson comes back to beat the Texans. That would leave us at a 6-6 record. And with 3 pretty games, if you haven't looked at the Browns' schedule, please do. But to close out this season, we have that 3-game stretch. Then the last 3 games of the season, we have the Saints, the Commanders, and Pittsburgh. We have the Ravens and Bengals in between that, right? But the last 3 games of the season, we should win each and every one of those games. So, with the 6-6 record and the 3 easy games to close out the year, theoretically, we would have 9 wins. And that would put us in a situation, this best case scenario, we would have to beat either the Ravens or the Bengals, just one of them. Just one of those games, we would have to beat either Cincy or Baltimore, and that would give us a 10-7 record, which should be good enough for a playoff spot. We've seen a 10-win team not make the playoffs before a couple of times, but that would give us a pretty good shot at the playoffs. And, once you get into playoffs, any given Sunday, anything can happen. Why can't it be the Browns, right? Why can't we shock the world? But to answer your question, I do believe everything depends on these next 2 to 3 weeks. Everything depends on how we respond to coming off of a bye week. Can we beat teams that... Can we beat other contenders? We'll put it that way, right? So it all depends on the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'm going to say yes for the sake of my own heart. Next up, we're going to have a question from Zach. Hopefully everything's good with you, Zach. Thanks for reaching out. His hot take. And I try to order these hot takes in order from how crazy they are. And this is the second hottest take that I got for when we talk about NFL. His take is that the Eagles are frauds. And this is the definition of a hot take. Calling the 8-0 lone undefeated team in the NFL frauds. But let's dive into it. Let's do our due diligence. The Eagles have, so far, throughout 9 weeks, they have had the 3rd easiest schedule so far this season, per Pro Football Focus. And they also have the 5th easiest schedule remaining. So they had the 3rd easiest to this point. They have the 5th easiest to close out the year. I will say in the Eagles' defense, they can't really control, who's put in front of them. All they can control is how they play and if they can manage the wins, right? But we've talked about the Eagles a lot. We talked about them a lot last Thursday. But as a refresher, they've only, to this point, they've only let the opposing team score 20-plus points in a game twice this season. And they've only turned the ball over 3 times this season. So 9 weeks in, I believe, 8 weeks for the Eagles, they've only given up 20 points twice this season, and they don't turn the ball over. And on top of that, Jalen Hurts looks like a legitimate MVP candidate. A.J. Brown looks like an all-pro wide receiver this season. With that said, they also just picked up Robert Quinn. The rich get richer. As the old saying goes. But surprisingly, would I say that they're the Super Bowl favorites right now? In my mind, no. I believe they're the favorites to make it out of the NFC, due to the weak conference this year. The NFC really is miles behind the AFC this season. But, and I guess technically, I'll put it this way. If I believe they can make it out the NFC, I can't say that they're not contenders. I can't say that they are frauds if they make it out the NFC. However, I mean, it's I can't see them beating the Chiefs in a one-game setting. I can't see them beating the Bills or, I mean, heck, even Cincy if they get going like they did last year, right? I mean, there's teams in the AFC that I believe are just ahead of the Eagles, if that makes any sense. I know the Eagles are undefeated. I know they're 8-0, but I can get what Zach is saying. I mean, this Eagles team, they don't really have any glaring flaws, but it just feels like something is missing. It feels, when you watch this team, it just feels like something is missing, right? And I believe we'll get a more clear answer as the season progresses. And maybe we don't. Maybe we go into the playoffs still with questions about this team. Obviously, I'm not expecting them to stay undefeated, but I believe that first loss that the Eagles have this season will be very glaring, and it's going to be interesting to see how they bounce back from a loss, right? Next up is going to be the I guess, craziest MV or hot take that we had on the NFL side of things. It comes in from AJ. Hopefully you're getting on 2K later. I'm going to need you. But it comes in from AJ. He says, Tyreek Hill should win the MVP. This is the craziest hot take that I got, like I said. But I don't hate the thought of it. And, as crazy as that may sound, I don't hate the thought of Tyreek Hill being in MVP contention. The only reason that this might be a crazy hot take is that the MVP is a quarterback-driven award, and there's practically no chance Tyreek Hill is even in the running for this award. And for that reason, we won't spend too much time on it, but I believe if anyone on that Dolphins team deserves the MVP, excuse me, it's Tyreek Hill. In the offseason, the Dolphins needed a star, they needed a change, and they traded a haul. They traded a lot of picks for Tyreek Hill. Now, when you trade that much for a player, you expect an immediate impact at the level that they were before you traded them. Just like how us Browns fans are expecting Deshaun Watson to come back and play at the level he's always played at when he returns, to make an immediate impact when you trade that much for a certain player. But man, Tyreek, he's brought impact to this team like no other. Like we couldn't even imagine. He's leading the league in receiving yards. And, aside from his play, right? Coming in, last offseason when they traded Tyreek, the Chiefs did, there were questions around Tyreek and whether he was actually a good football player. Sounds crazy, right? But there's questions whether he was only good because Pat Mahomes was his quarterback for all those years in Kansas City, right? But he's answered all those questions. And in my eyes, he's made Tua look like a top 10 quarterback in the league right now. For that reason, this isn't a crazy take to me. I do believe he should be in contention, but he's not my MVP. Like I said, it's a quarterback-driven award. I would give Jalen Hurts the award. I would give Pat Mahomes, most importantly, the award over pretty much anybody. But Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen are probably the front runners. Following that is probably Jalen Hurts. I don't hate the take, though, AJ. I do not hate the take. But that's going to do it for our NFL takes. We're going to move on to our NBA takes. And the first one comes in from Mackenzie again. And she's asking if the Cavs are real contenders. And like I was talking about earlier, I believe the Cavs are like the Vikings of the NBA, if that makes any sense. On paper, you see our roster, you see our record, and then you see our advanced stats if you go that far. The answer is an obvious yes. We're obviously contenders. But at the end of the day, just like the Eagles, like I said, just like the Vikings, there just seems like there's something missing with this Cavs team. As a Cavs fan, I hope we shock the world. And that's not to say that we have a bad team. We're far from that point, right? We have a good team. We have a great team, arguably. But there may just be teams that are better. So not that we fail expectations or don't meet expectations. There might just be teams that are better in the Eastern Conference. I believe that we will be a top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference when it's all said and done. I do believe we can make it out the first round. Obviously, it depends on matchups and injuries and all that, but I don't predict that stuff. But I can see us beating. I can see us beating the majority of teams in the East. It's just it's when it comes to that second round and we match up against the Celtics, Sixers, or the Bucks, right? Those are probably the three teams that should make it out the first round. I just can't see us when it's settled down in a 7-game series. If the other teams are healthy, I mean, we don't stand a chance against the Bucks. I'll put it that way. The Bucks, I don't see. That'll be an interesting game. I think the Cavs and Bucks play on the 14th of this month, excuse me. So that'll be an interesting game to watch nonetheless. I just don't see us standing a chance against the Bucks. Maybe the Celtics, as we've beaten them twice already this year. But for a Sixers team, I don't know if in a 7-game series we can beat them, if healthy, obviously. So I won't say that we aren't contenders, but with like the Bucks, we'll use them. With them being as dominant as they've been, they just had their first loss last night, but I still think they're like 10-1. It's hard to see any contenders in the East besides the Bucks. I will say for this question, we're contenders. But it's like there's levels to it, right? I think there's contenders, and then you take about a tier or two down, and then the next team comes in, which is probably the Celtics, Cavs, and 76ers, right? It's just the Bucks are too dominant for any other team to come out the East in my eyes. Next up, we have AJ again. He says that the Clippers won't make it out the first round, and man, is this going to be an interesting one. When he sent this one in, I didn't think it was going to be too crazy of a take because, like I said, I mean, anything can happen in the NBA. But, man, I realized that I wanted to talk about this topic more and more as I walked to the studio today. We've talked about it a lot on this show, about this Clippers team. I believe there are real concerns with this Clippers team, and if their on-court chemistry will be there when it matters most, when it comes to playoff time. Kawhi has only played 2 of 11 games that they've had this season. He's been on a minute restriction when he has played those 2 games. That was over 2 weeks ago, those 2 games. In those games, he only averaged 12.5 points on terrible splits. Again, it's a small sample size, but still, we have to look at it. And we have to ask the question, when is enough enough? How much longer is Kawhi going to miss time? He just missed a year and a half of basketball sitting on his couch. He was hurt, but he's been off of basketball for a year and a half now. How much longer until we get to see Kawhi back on the court, the Kawhi Leonard that we all know and love, and in consecutive games at that? I don't remember the last time we've seen Kawhi play consecutive games. I understand from the Clippers' perspective, you want to preserve your stars for the playoffs, right? But surprise, surprise, on-court chemistry is important. You need your guys to play together. And, especially when when you have a team like the Clippers that their aspirations are a championship, right? You need your guys to play together. You need that on-court chemistry, especially when it comes to a slowed-down 7-game series, especially against the top teams in the league. But I do love this team's depth. They're arguably the deepest team in the league. It's been awesome to see John Wall and his resurgence. He's out there running, showing glimpses of his old self. It's always good to see that as just a sports fan in general, right? And PG's also looked great in the last week or so after his slow start. So that's always good to see. PG's always fun to watch. I predicted this team to make the finals, as you know. But it's hard to see this team there now. I predicted this team to make the finals, expecting Kawhi to at least play half the games this season. But he's not. He's on the sidelines in dress clothes. And it gets harder and harder to see this team living up to my expectations. Not that they mean anything, but it gets harder and harder to see this team live up to those expectations when their best player and a top 10 player in the NBA is on the sidelines. I could very well see this team being a first-round exit if they don't get Kawhi Leonard on the court sooner rather than later. Last NBA hot take we have from Bakari, good friend of the show. I've known him also since second grade. So, shout out to him. This hot take comes in. He says DeMarcus Cousins is one of the most influential bigs of all time. This one just warms my heart just to read it. Just to read it as Boogie is one of my personal favorite players of all time. If I had to put together a roster of my 13 favorite players, Boogie's on there, and he might even start. But, I believe this statement is not talked about enough, and I don't believe Boogie gets the credit he deserves when we talk about influential players. Boogie was drafted in 2010, a time where the league he was drafted in 2010, I'll put it this way. At a time where the league didn't have many inside-out bigs, or at least not efficient inside-out bigs that can play both sides of the ball. And from the time he was drafted in 2010, all the way to 2017 when he had that career-altering injury, Boogie was a top 5 center. And arguably, for the entirety of 2013 to 2017, you could say he was the best center. I will say that. From 2013 to 2017, that 4-year stretch, he was the best center in the NBA. Unfortunately, like I said, the injury happened about midway through the season against the Rockets. I remember watching that game, unfortunately. Sad to see when any player gets hurt, right? But especially, it hurts even more when it's your favorite players. But we all know that, after that injury, he was dealt a bad hand, as far as his contract. The rest of his career and opportunity, was just gone after that. But his impact, nonetheless, is still being left on the game today. We see the majority of the bigs in the league now, that they're able to have the inside-out ability. They're able to bang with the bigs, but also on the defensive end, able to protect for the most part, grab a rebound, and most importantly, handle the ball. And in some cases, in 2 cases, I will say, Boogie's kind of been replicated. Two bigs that have all of these traits. They're able to score, rebound, defend, handle the ball, play make. 2 bigs in the league, that are able to have all those traits and also carry a team like Boogie did in Sacramento for all those years are Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. Joel Embiid, sure, you can you can pick at my statement here and say, well, Joel Embiid has a little bit more defense. Jokic has a little bit more playmaking. They're not perfect players, right? Not everybody's going to be an exact replica, but, a replica nonetheless. You can see they got their inspiration from Boogie, or at least most of it from Boogie. And Boogie, in 2010, as a rookie, was grabbing a rebound, dribbling it down the court, and then taking a center off the dribble and getting an and-one. Same possession. You didn't see that at that time. It was a get the ball to your guard, and it was just like the 90s or early 2000s and late 90s basketball, where we're going to run sets every single time down the court. Especially, we're not going to run an offense through a dribbling big, right? I don't know. There's no doubt in my mind that Boogie is one of the most underappreciated players in NBA history, and whether people want to admit it or not, his impact has been left on the game of basketball. It will continue to be left on the game of basketball. But that's going to do it for our NBA hot takes. We're going to get into the fantasy hot takes next. I'm sorry you've waited this long. If you have, you're an MVP. You're a GOAT for that. But we're making good time. I think we're only 39 minutes in now, so just give me a second and we'll get into our fantasy takes. All right. Our fantasy takes, we have 3 questions here. This first one I spent a lot of time thinking about. And this comes in from Travis, my neighbor. Hopefully Winnie and Alicia, they're doing great. I'll be home in a couple weeks. I'll see you guys. And, it's always good to see you guys and watch some football, right? But regardless, his Week 10 fantasy question for this next Sunday, he's asking Prescott in Green Bay or Trevor Lawrence at Kansas City. He says he's leaning Lawrence. We'll see about that. We'll see what I think here in a second. We'll start with Dak Prescott. That was the first quarterback you mentioned. He's coming off of the best game of his season 2 weeks ago, and then he's also coming off of a bye week. So that's always good for him and for him recovering from the injury he suffered early on in the year more rest time, it's only going to be better for him, right? He is playing the fifth best defense against the quarterback in fantasy football. So I think on fantasy it'll tell you it's the 27th. So it's not on paper a good matchup for Dak Prescott. But we talked about it on last Thursday's show. Green Bay, one thing that they struggle to do, well, they struggle in a lot of things. But one thing especially is stopping the run. They're the third worst in the league at stopping the run. 29th ranked in the league, obviously. I'm expecting Dallas in this game to run early and often. Even though Zeke is going to probably miss another week with the injury he had. I mean, you saw the success that they had against Chicago. And Chicago's not too far ahead of, they're ahead of Green Bay when it comes to rush defense. Excuse me. So I expect them. Tony Pollard's going to get a heavy dose this game. He's probably going to get the most touches on the ground that he's ever seen. And like I said, I expect Dallas to run early and often. The only thing that I would be worried about here with Dak is that, as we know as Browns fans, or just NFL fans in general, when you're able to have a deadly run attack, that opens up the passing game, that opens up the play-action shots. So one thing that I'm going to say is that these two quarterbacks are very close to me this week. I don't do rankings, but if I did, they would be like 9 and 10, or they'd be like 7 and 8. So for Dak, I believe he has the higher upside because he is going to be. They're going to be able to run the ball efficiently, right? But he's also going to have the play-action pass, and he's going to be able to throw it deep to CeeDee Lamb, to Michael Gallup, and all those weapons they have over there in Dallas. But before we make a decision, let's get into why I believe Lawrence. It's a good topic, and you said you're leaning Lawrence, so we'll see what we think here. Throughout 9 weeks so far this season, so throughout the 9 weeks this year, Kansas City has given up on average 22 points a week to the quarterback position. But let's be honest. Last Sunday night, Ryan Tannehill missed because he was sick or whatever, or his ankle, I think it was. So they played Malik Willis, who is barely ready to play in the NFL. He only got 7 points. We're going to take him out of the equation. Because, let's be honest, Tennessee is a run-first offense anyway. So let's take the backup quarterback and Malik Willis' stat line out of the equation. So now we're going to have 8 weeks of data. Excuse me. I can't talk right now, or I need something to drink, right? But throughout 8 weeks of data, the first 8 weeks of the year, quarterbacks averaged 25 points a game. It was more so closer to 26, but 25 points a game this year against Kansas City. The Jags have a good receiving core. They've continued to use Evan Ingram more and more each week. And ETN, he's been given the keys. He's been getting more and more touches on the ground. They're going to need to pass more to win this game. So, though Kansas City also struggles against the run, like Green Bay does, I believe Kansas City, with their high-powered offense, Jacksonville, like I said, they're going to have to pass the ball this game. They're going to have to try and keep up if they want a chance in this game. And though ETN, like I said, he probably will see a lot of first quarter or first half touches on the ground. I think depending on how quickly KC gets out the gate, or how quickly they get out the gate, the Jags are going to have to transform their offense to pass a lot more. And that's why I believe I'm with you. I am with you. The higher upside, and I believe also the higher floor, is with Trevor Lawrence this week, even though I believe, not on paper, but on just based off the talent that the Chiefs have, this is the best defense in the Mahomes era. How much that says, it doesn't really say much at all, right? Because they've had pretty bad defenses. But I believe Trevor Lawrence has the higher floor than Dak Prescott. I believe he has the higher ceiling than Dak Prescott. They're going to need to pass early and often in this game to keep up with the Chiefs' offense. They're in Arrowhead. Give me Trevor Lawrence. I'm with you on that. Oh, and also, if you're ever looking to move off Travis Kelce, I heard he gets sick a lot in December. Especially in February too, when it comes to playoff time for fantasy. So if you ever want to move off of Travis Kelce in the next week or two, just hit me up. I can always send you over a Deshaun Watson or a top 10 tight end and Gerald Everett and a piece of your choosing. I'm just messing with you. But seriously, though, if you want to move off Travis Kelce, I'm your guy. But next up, we're going to have a question from an anonymous source. They didn't want to be named on the show, but that's okay. We're gonna stick and move, right? We're gonna have a question. It's going to be: do I move off of Alvin Kamara now that the assault video has surfaced? If you're unaware of what this question is talking about, last year after the Pro Bowl, Alvin Kamara and his friends went to a bar, and he got into an altercation with someone at that bar. And let's just say it didn't end up too well physically for the other guy involved in this equation, right? It's often like people forget that Alvin Kamara and the rest of NFL players and NBA players, they're generational athletes. It's like people forget that. And, these are not the normal humans that you see on the side of the street. I mean, these are the 1%, right? But there was speculation whether the NFL was going to suspend Alvin Kamara for this incident before the season even started. But the ruling on the case was delayed until the new year. That's not until the next NFL season. That is until January. That's actually right before fantasy playoffs, which is scary for fantasy football players, right? But as far as fantasy goes, obviously we don't want to lose a pivotal part of our team right before the playoffs start. But that's where it gets tricky because we don't want to lose them for nothing. And that's why this question is here. And that's why I wanted to bring it to the show. Personally, if they didn't have enough evidence before the season started, and if they didn't find any additional evidence since then, because we would have heard about it as fans, I would hold on to Alvin Kamara. I would take the risk, as I believe it's more likely they suspend him to start next season or fine him, at the start of next season. Then I believe that's more likely than it would be to suspend him now, right? Especially because the Saints suck, and I'm not saying the NFL does it on purpose, but I mean, an Alvin Kamara suspension doesn't really change anything for the Saints. But if you are scared, by all means, move Alvin Kamara. Preferably do it the last possible week your fantasy league allows you to. So if that's, it's usually the end of November, the trade deadline in fantasy football leagues. So what would that be, like week 10 of, or not week 10, I apologize, week 12 or week 13 of your fantasy football season? Go out there and trade them then. Trade them right before the trade deadline, because to no one's surprise, you're going to get, a valuable wide receiver one or running back one, or maybe even both in return for him. And a lot can change in a couple weeks, right? So you can always see if a team's struggling and you have Alvin Kamara and you're worried about this suspension. Go move them. Go grab two pieces that'll help you in the long run when it comes to fantasy playoff time. Our last question, last but not least, comes in from that same source. He also asks, do I capitalize off of Joe Mixon's 50-point week with his difficult playoff schedule? We're talking fantasy playoff schedule. And less usage when Jamar Chase returns. This question is very interesting. Speaking on a personal note, I faced Joe Mixon last week, and he did just enough to beat me. So, yes, I do feel a certain way about Joe Mixon right now. I'm not going to obviously bring it to the podcast. We're very family friendly here. But I do feel a certain way about him. And however, I mean, this question was interesting because when Jamar does come back, yes, there will be an adjustment period, maybe a week or two. But we can expect this team to go right back to passing. Having Mixon essentially as a third option yet again to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. I mean, the biggest thing we have to look at with Joe Mixon is that this Bengals team is not on top of the AFC North like they were last year. They don't have time to play around. The Ravens right now, they're in first place, and the Bengals are going to have to be fighting for that playoff spot. I mean, if the Browns can turn things around, it's going to turn into a very interesting AFC North, to say the least. But I mean, I'm sorry, because it's very hard to put into words, right? Because it's almost like you're looking at it like, oh, and this is ridiculous. He just scored 55 points and won me my week. I'm not trading this man anytime soon. You know what? And I would agree. I see no reason to trade Mixon quite yet, but I would recommend that if his production remains elite, obviously we're not expecting 5 touchdowns and 55 points a week, but if he remains around that 20 to 30 point range with Jamar Chase being out, same case with Kamara. I would look to dump him, week 12 or week 13, right before your trade deadline, because like I said, they're going to be fighting for a playoff spot, and sure, there might be that adjustment period where Jamar Chase needs to get a week or two to get his feet back under him. But man, I'm telling you, there's nothing that's pointed to not believing that this team will just go right back to being the passing offense that they've always been when Jamar Chase returns. And if you can move off of Mixon, you can get, Mixon's trade value right now is got to be top 5 in fantasy off of that week alone. If you can go out there and get 2 RB1s or 2, a wide receiver 1 and a running back 1, that's going to suit your team up better. Obviously, it depends on what the rest of your team looks like, what your situation is, what the rest of the league looks like. It obviously all depends. But I would not be opposed to trading Joe Mixon in 2 or 3 weeks when his production stays high, stays as a top 5 running back, and you can go and move him and get elite pieces because you're expecting the downfall when Jamar Chase returns. But that's going to do it, man, for our hot takes and our questions. You guys have been amazing, but let's get into the outro and get you guys out of here. Okay. That's going to do it for the first ever fan-led episode. I plan to do these maybe once a month or once every other month. I want to get you guys involved, but I don't know. We'll have to see. Regardless, this was amazing. Yet again, another round of applause for you guys. You guys are the real MVP. You guys are amazing. But regardless, if you're new to the channel, if you're a returning subscriber, or hey, maybe you're just a lurker. Maybe you've just been tuning into the shows and you haven't subscribed yet, or you haven't realized that you haven't subscribed yet. This is your reminder to subscribe to the channel, drop a like, hit that bell to turn on your post notifications so you know when I post. Hey, I just had a post in the community section. You saw Travis. He was the only one in the YouTube community section. That's going to be a lot easier on your guys' end than maybe even just following the Instagram and going that route. Whatever works easier for you guys, right? But again, I can't thank you guys enough for the support so far on the channel. It's been more than I expected, and it's been more than I could have asked for at this point. But that's going to do it for today's show. I will see you guys on Thursday, where we have the Thursday night preview, the picks of the week, and the Week 10 waiver pickups and trade targets. We'll even include that in there if we have any. Also, shout out to Northfield Inn. My mom called me last night. She said that a lot of you guys are in there listening to the show. So, I haven't been there in a while, but I appreciate each and every last one of you guys. You guys are amazing as well. Hopefully everything's good with you guys. But that's going to do it. I'll get you guys out of here. That's going to do it for today's show. I'll see you guys on Thursday. Until then, peace, love, and hugs. I'm out.